Governments are always making these massive decisions about how to spend our money, right? They jump in to fix problems, to make things fairer, and to try and build a better future. But here's the thing. Every single one of those big decisions, it's a super complex balancing act, and there are almost always hidden costs. So let's really dig into what that means.
Okay, just look at this number for a second. 4.49 lakh crore rupees. To put that into perspective, that's a truly staggering amount of money. It's almost 9% of India's entire union budget for 2025-26. So, what in the world is it for?
Well, that is the price tag on India's gender budget. It's a massive investment, all aimed at leveling the playing field and empowering women all across the country. And you gotta admit, that's a pretty noble goal, right?
But that, of course, raises a really big question. How does a government decide if an investment of this size is, actually worth it? And maybe even more important, what are the hidden risks, the unintended consequences that can pop up even when you have the best intentions? That is exactly what we're going to break down right here.
All right, Section 1, a budget for equality. So first, let's get a handle on the goal itself. We'll use this gender budget as our main example. What is it actually trying to do?
So, at its core, gender budgeting isn't some totally separate budget just for women. That's a common misconception. It's actually more of a strategic tool. Think of it like putting on a new pair of glasses to look at the entire government budget and see how different policies affect different genders. And then you can direct the money where it's needed most to level things out.
And look, the need for something like this is pretty urgent. The 2024 Gender Gap Report puts India at 129th place out of 146 countries. That's a really stark reminder that there's a lot of work to be done. And the goal here, it's not just about fixing discrimination today. It's about kicking off a positive cycle for the future, where empowered women can then invest back into their families, their communities, and really lift everyone up. Okay, Section 2, the big trade-off. So, a noble goal, right? But this is where things start to get really complicated. Because in the world of economics, pretty much every choice, even a great one aimed at fairness, comes with something called the big trade-off.
And really, it all boils down to this one big question. Can a country have it all? Can you have perfect equality for every single person and, at the same time, create the absolute maximum amount of wealth? Is it even possible to get the best of both worlds?
Now, if you just look at the raw data, it's a mess. What we're seeing here is a plot of wealth per person, that's what economists call efficiency, against income equality. And look at it. The data points for all these developed countries are just scattered everywhere. There's no obvious pattern at all. You've got some more equal countries that are rich, some that aren't. Same for the unequal countries. It just looks like a random blob of dots. So you might be thinking, is this whole trade-off thing just a myth?
Well, not so fast. The economist Arthur Okun came up with this brilliant metaphor to explain it. He called it the leaky bucket. Imagine you're trying to carry money from the rich to the poor, right? But the bucket you're using, it leaks. Now, why does it leak? Well, because the whole process of redistributing wealth isn't free. You've got the administrative costs of running the programs, and maybe higher taxes slightly discourage people from working or investing that extra hour. Those are the leaks. It's wealth that just kind of disappears along the way. And that lost value? That's the cost of creating more equality.
So here's the big aha moment. The reason that data looks so messy is because a lot of countries are just not operating at their peak. They aren't reaching their full economic potential. The real trade-off, the hidden pattern, only shows up when you focus on the absolute best performers at each level of equality. It's like you're trying to find the theoretical limit of what's possible, and economists have a name for that. They call it the best practice frontier.
And here's what that looks like. Watch what happens when we trace a line that connects only the top-performing countries. All of a sudden, that random mess of dots turns into a clear, downward-sloping curve. That right there, that is the trade-off. Once you're on that line, on that frontier, you simply can't get more equality without giving up a little bit of efficiency. And you can't get more efficiency without giving up some equality.
And believe it or not, researchers have actually put a number on this. When a country is operating on that frontier, for every 1% increase in inequality, you see about a 0.3% rise in per capita income. It's not just a theory, it's a quantifiable exchange.
Okay, Section 3, when good intentions fail. So we've got a noble goal and we've got this fundamental trade-off. But there's another huge risk we have to talk about. The scary possibility that the government solution could actually make the problem even worse.
So you've probably heard the term market failure, right? That's the problem the government is trying to fix. But there's a dangerous flip side to that coin, government failure. And that's the risk that the government's solution ends up being worse than the original problem. So what is it exactly? Well, government failure is basically any economic mess-up created by the government's own actions. It happens when the total costs of a policy, and yeah, that includes all those leaks in the bucket we talked about, end up being bigger than the benefits.
And this kind of failure can happen for a bunch of reasons. First up, imperfect information. I mean, let's be real. Governments can't know everything, so they might make a bad call. Then there's political self-interest, when a decision helps a politician get reelected but doesn't really help the public. Number 3 is policy myopia, which is just a fancy way of saying short-term thinking, focusing on a quick fix that wins votes now instead of a real long-term solution. And finally, there's something called regulatory capture. This is a tricky one. It's when the industry that's supposed to be regulated ends up having way too much influence over the regulators themselves.
Okay, Section 4, weighing the costs. So, with all these trade-offs and risks, how on earth do governments navigate this minefield? How do they even try to make rational decisions? Well, they have a primary tool that's designed for exactly this challenge.
That main tool is called a cost-benefit analysis, or CBA for short. And it's basically a very systematic way of weighing all the pros and cons of a big project or policy. Now, the really important part here is that it tries to put a price tag on everything, not just the obvious economic stuff, but also social benefits, environmental impacts, you name it.
Honestly, the best way to think about it is like a super-powered pros and cons list for the entire government. It's what allows them to compare two totally different things, like, say, building a new highway versus funding a new health program, on a true apples-to-apples basis. At the end of the day, the goal is to have a solid, evidence-based reason to believe that the good stuff is going to outweigh the bad stuff.
All right, Section 5, the Great Balancing Act. Let's bring all these pieces together. We've talked about the noble goal, the tough trade-off, the serious risk, and the essential tool. This whole messy process, that's the reality of how policy gets made.
And this stuff isn't set in stone. We can actually see these choices playing out over time. If you look at the paths of countries like the US and Sweden over decades, you can see them moving. Both countries stay really close to that best practice frontier, but they've made different choices. They've landed on different spots along that curve, each one reflecting a different balance between efficiency and equity that aligns with their society's values.
So let's tie this all up with a bow. Policymaking is, at its heart, a constant, difficult balancing act. It's about using a tool, like a cost-benefit analysis, to chase a goal, like gender equality. But you have to do that while navigating an unavoidable trade-off, efficiency versus equity, and doing everything you can to avoid the massive risk of government failure.
And that leaves us with one last really tough question. We know for a fact that the bucket is leaky. We know that some value is always going to get lost on the way to creating a fairer society. So the real question for all of us is this: how do we decide which leaks in the bucket are actually worth tolerating?